what's going on? This is my UFC 298 full card of predictions and breakdown video. Our last card, we did great. We're now 2024. We're now 18.15 units in the green, and I'm excited for this card. There's a lot of question marks, a lot of fighters that were knocked out in their last fight, and we don't know which version of themselves that we're gonna see. But that's what makes these cards exciting. So let's dive right in. First up on the bout order, we got Andrea Lee versus Miranda Maverick. Andrea Lee is 2-6 in her last 8 UFC fights. Although this doesn't mean much, it makes me wonder what Andrea Lee has left after she's been on the wrong side of a lot of wars. Miranda Maverick, on the other hand, is coming into this fight with a little bit more momentum. Her cardio for 3 rounds was a little bit shady back in 2021 against Macy Barber. But also, Macy Barber, I think that that's because of Macy Barber's fight style. It just feels like Andrea Lee is a little bit flat-footed in some of these exchanges and some of her last fights. And whenever I look down the list of all of her wins, her one of her more recent wins, Cynthia Calvillo, I think that that was just a pure size advantage win. And so I don't have very much hope for Andrea Lee to get this done. I have a quarter unit on Miranda Maverick by decision. Moving on up the card, we have Oban Elliott versus Val Woodburn. And honestly, on this one, Val Woodburn is a huge question mark for me. He just got knocked out by Bo Nickel. It was one of those fights where he could have bolstered himself into a huge spotlight, or just, it's failing upwards. He even mentioned it in an interview. He failed upwards. So it's not a huge morality hit, but it does have some question marks. And he's obviously moving down a weight class from 185 to 170. He has only fought in his career at 185 and 205, light heavyweight, he states. And this is a lot of question marks going into this matchup. He says he's feeling a lot quicker. Obviously, that's something to expect. He has a lot of power behind his shots, and he's obviously already in middleweight. He was cracking people, but they were older people. They were like old men, like 38 years old. So it's interesting. I don't know what to expect from him. Oban Elliott, on the other hand, I think that he has the ability to turn it up in late round 2/round 3. And I think that this could definitely sway the judges in his favor. And with the way I've seen Val Woodburn gas out in some of his film, I think that Oban Elliott could potentially score a late KO in round 3. So I have Oban Elliott by KO or decision. Moving on up the card, we have Josh Kinlan versus Danny Barlow. Danny Barlow, I think he effectively manages distance, and I think that that's the kryptonite of Josh Kinlan. I think that Trey Waters did that. Josh Kinlan has this bad habit of shelling up and telegraphing on these big looping strikes, and it won't cut it. It won't cut it against Danny Barlow. I think Danny Barlow is going to be able to just simply move backwards out of range and counter with his own strikes. And I think it's going to be just the same thing for 3 rounds, a complete masterclass. And that's why I have 2 units on Danny Barlow. Move on up the card to the Battle of the Giants, Zhang Mingyang versus Brenson Ribeiro. And I think that this is a 50-50 fight in the stand-up in most cases. But Ribeiro likes to throw in the occasional straight cross. And I think that that's going to throw up the mix, because Zhang Mingyang, we saw his opponent just throwing straight haymakers and still being able to catch Zhang Mingyang while he entered in. So there's a little bit of a tendency to invite himself into brawls, and that makes me shy away from him. And I like Brenson Ribeiro to win by round 1 KO, because we've seen the ground and pound that this guy can do. And hence his nickname, he pounds away at his opponents like a gorilla. We move on up the card to Rinya Nakamura versus Carlos Vera. So Rinya Nakamura, he's obviously great. He hasn't been the most impressive prospect to me. I think that he can definitely do a lot more. Like, I think if he finished Fernie Garcia, that would have been a lot better, especially considering the fact that Haider Emil put him away in round 2. But ultimately, Rinya Nakamura, I think that he beats Carlos Vera probably by decision or submission. I have no idea. But the fact that he's a minus 1,200 favorite makes no sense to me. That's so much of a favorite. Like, why does that even happen? Carlos Vera, there's a lot of question marks around him. He was a tough fighter and literally on the Ultimate Fighter. And yeah, we don't know how good he's going to be against UFC level talent. We're going to find out. We move on up the card to Marcos Rogerio de Lima versus Justin Tafa. Now, this is one of those question mark fights that I was talking about at the very beginning of the video. Marcos Rogerio de Lima. I fully expected him to beat Derek Lewis. I thought that he has enough tools to just leg kick Derek Lewis, to, stay out of range of all those power shots, land jabs on him. You just keep him at range. But obviously, Derek Lewis opened up with a switch flying knee. And 30 seconds into the fight, he KO'd Marcos Rogerio de Lima. So I didn't expect that, but I think that he returns to the OG version of himself in this fight. I think that he'll leg kick and just completely batter the leg of Justin Tafa. I think he'll be able to win all the stand-up exchanges in general, just outboxing, clinching whenever Justin Tafa starts to land. I think it'll be a tricky puzzle for Justin Tafa, and that's why I have Marcos Rogerio de Lima to win this fight. We move on up the card to Amanda Lemos versus Mackenzie Dern. Now, there's question marks on both sides. We have one side where Amanda Lemos is coming off of a 25-minute beatdown against Zhang Wei Li. And then we have the other side, Mackenzie Dern, who's coming off of a knockout loss against Jessica Andrade where she was dropped multiple times. But then, honestly, I think about it, and I think Amanda Lemos, she was treated like a white belt against Jessica Andrade. She was submitted in a standing arm triangle. I don't think I've even seen that in my lifetime watching UFC before that fight. So, honestly, whenever I look at this fight, I think Amanda Lemos at some point is going to rely on getting close to Mackenzie Dern. She's always going to need to be close to her because of her size. And I think Mackenzie Dern is going to end up being able to grab her, get a hold of her, get to the ground, and work her ground game in all 3 rounds. And I think that Mackenzie Dern is going to be able to either eke out a submission or win this fight by decision. Moving on up the card, we have Anthony Hernandez versus Roman Kopylov. I'm very high on Anthony Hernandez just because he has always had such great chain wrestling, and now he seems to be putting together his striking. His boxing is looking better every single fight. I'm excited to see Roman Kopylov have to deal with it, but I haven't seen much of Roman Kopylov's ground game, and that's why I think that Roman Kopylov is going to have the harder test to prepare against, ultimately. I think that Roman Kopylov is going to have to hurt him with kicks early on and have to keep him guessing constantly, but overall, I think Anthony Hernandez by decision is what I'm going with. Moving on up the card, we move on to Merab Dvalishvili versus Henry Cejudo. Merab's fight style, he's going to have Henry Cejudo backpedaling for all 3 rounds. And I think Henry Cejudo is an excellent analyst of the fight game. He understands what he's going to have to do. I think he has to step off, hit Merab with some big shots, counter effectively, takedown defense, maybe mix in some of his own takedowns. I don't know. But he has to do something to deal with this constant forward pace and pressure of Merab Dvalishvili. And at this point in his career, he just fired his main head coach, and I don't think it's a great look. I think Henry Cejudo might be going into this fight just for a paycheck, and I think Merab Dvalishvili has so much momentum in his career that he's bound to get this title shot. We move on up the card to Jeff Neal versus Ian Gary. Ian Gary, I'm not a big fan of Ian Gary, but the man can fight. He leg kicks like no other, and right now he's one of the scariest welterweights. Jeff Neal, he has great boxing. He doesn't telegraph on a lot of his punches, and I think that that's what makes him the tricky puzzle that he is. The fact that he landed so much on Shavkat was very concerning to us, but I think that Ian Gary is better at striking than Shavkat, and I expect that Ian Gary is going to soundly outstrike and stay on the outside against Jeff Neal and win this fight. We move on up the card to Robert Whittaker versus Paulo Costa. This is another one of those fights, like I said at the beginning of the video. Robert Whittaker, last time he fought, he was knocked out against Dricus du Plessis, who is now the middleweight champion. Robert Whittaker, I think that he's going to want to approach this fight with a little bit more safety. He wants to stay on the outside probably against Paulo Costa, knowing that Paulo Costa has that power punching ability, the ability to end a fight at any point. And so I expect Robert Whitaker to utilize that triple jab. He makes maybe some of those 1-2 head kicks. And yeah, I think that he wins this soundly via decision just because of how many tools he has in his arsenal. I think he has the grappling edge as well. We move on to the main event of UFC 298. Alexander Volkanovski is coming back to defend his 145 throne against Ilia Topuria. Alexander Volkanovski coming off of a KO loss to Islam Makhachev. It was, he said that he was underprepared for the fight. It makes sense, but now he's coming on against a boxer, someone who's very, very sound in his stand-up. I think Alexander Volkanovski is going to have to rely on his leg kicks to throw off the rhythm of Ilia, but Ilia's pace and his pressure are too just grueling for an opponent sometimes. But we've seen Alexander Volkanovski, whenever he's doing everything he can to get a win, how far Alexander Volkanovski goes, how much of a warrior he is. And that's why I'm willing to take, yes, fight to go the distance, and also Ilia Topuria moneyline. I think Ilia Topuria is going to outbox Alexander Volkanovski. I think he's going to effectively stop all of the takedowns, and I think he wins the title. I think Ilia Topuria becomes the 145 champion. And I honestly hate saying that because I love Volkanovski so much. I think he's such a great guy. And I think he's such a great fighter too. I think he has such an incredible story. Like the fact that he came from rugby, the fact that he weighed so much. I think he's so great for being vulnerable, talking about, what's going on in his life. Yeah, I think he's a great person, but yeah, I have Ilia Topuria winning this fight. I appreciate you all for watching. Make sure to go to www.monkeykingbets.com and cop some merch if you want to support the channel. This is what we use to keep our channel running. Make sure to go check out my links down in the description. We have a Discord channel. I've used my Discord channel to post my picks early every single week so that anyone who wants my picks, they want to be in the Discord because they're going to be able to get the props at the earliest time. They'll be able to get the unit allocation at the earliest time, all the analysis, all the breakdown, everything. So make sure to go check out my links, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.